Hello, Witchipedians. This is Dawn Black, and this is the Magical Spots Witchipedia podcast. Today, we are going to talk about spells. When people identify me as a witch, one of the first questions I am asked is if I cast spells. My answer is, of course. But everyone casts spells. Witches and other cunning folk just do it on purpose. And yes, I cast spells on purpose often. And then they ask me, do they really work? To which I reply, of course they work. I wouldn't keep doing them if they didn't. That would be absurd. But what is a spell? According to the Webster's Dictionary, a spell is a spoken word or form of words held to have magic power. A state of enchantment, a strong, compelling influence or attraction. According to Wiktionary, 16th century definition is words or formula supposed to have magical powers. It gives the Proto-Indo-European roots for the words to tell and to speak or sound as the origin of the word spell. And the Oxford Dictionary of Folklore differentiates between spells and charms, stating that spells are generally to overcome another's will or bring harm, while charms are for healing or protection. This, of course, does not stand up to modern language, though as a charm has very different meaning now. It's often associated with love and fascination spells, which are generally believed to be harmful. In some cases, as well as objects that may do good or bad or whatever, helpful or harmful. Of course, I have my own long considered definition of what a spell is that I think holds up, at least to my own scrutiny. I hope you will indulge me as I share it with you. My definition of a spell is as follows. A spell is a series of words and symbolic actions that bring about an energetic change in a situation for the purpose of bringing about the spellcaster's will. So, a spell is something, words and actions, symbolic words and actions, that change the energy surrounding a situation to make, to make it more likely that the thing that you want to happen will happen. We'll talk about how well spells work and under what circumstances they do and don't work and stuff on another day. There's definitely going to be a part 2, maybe even a part 3 of this spell discussion. But for now, we're just talking about what a spell is. Now, spells contain words and symbolic actions or formula. And to me, a spell has 3 important parts. The first and most important is the intention. That is what you want the spell to do. This is the most important part because it is what everything else hinges on. People often come into newbie witch groups and ask, what's a good spell to start with? What's an easy spell for a new witch to cast? But that is the wrong place to start. That's the wrong question. The question is, what do you need or want to cast a spell for? You start with your intention and then you worry about the particulars, your modality later. You can literally cast a spell for any purpose. To help pass the test, to make your house more welcoming, to buy a house, to buy a car, to make yourself less or more noticeable or attractive to anyone or just certain people or animals or employers or whatever. To make a location less or more welcoming. To bring more money in your life, to bring more people in your life, whatever. First, you decide what you want to cast a spell for, and then you decide what your spell looks like. So you set your intention. Then you can go to those newbie groups and say, I would like to cast a spell for this purpose. Does anyone have any suggestions or whatever? And you'll get a much better response. The next part of the spell is what I call the incantation, but what older references would call the spell. And some modern sources would call the statement of intent. Now, your statement of intent is really like what your intention is. I will pass this test. I will buy this house. That's your intention. I'm going to buy this house. Your incantation is a more flowery version of it. It should be made of a positive statement, not I wish to buy this house or I want to buy this house, because then you'll be casting a spell to want or to wish, and you don't want that. You want the house. So I will buy this house. That's your spell. I will have new friends move in next door. I will have friends. Friends will move into the house next door. The house is for sale, whatever. Employers find me interesting. Not, I wish employers find me interesting, because then you can just keep on wishing. You understand? When you are casting a spell, it's a positive statement. And when you create your incantation for your spell out of your positive statement of intention, you might make it a little more flowery. You want to make it rhyme, maybe, if you can, or at least have a rhythm. It doesn't have to be high poetry. The Wiccan Rede, which outlines in detail how spells are done in the Wiccan tradition, says to bind the spell every time, let the spell be spake in rhyme. There are various versions that word it slightly differently, but, that's the general gist. Now, I will argue that the incantation doesn't have to rhyme, but it is better if there is a rhythm, at least. The reason for this is that it sticks in your head better. When you're trying to create a change in your energetic situation, you want it to stick in your head. Eventually, you might not be thinking about it, you might not be remembering, but it's sticking in your head. So you think about the way we remember things in school. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. In 1692, the Salem witch trials come for you. I personally have trouble with numbers too, but when I was a kid, I had to remember all these phone numbers. I don't anymore, but I could put them to a rhythm, boom, 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 and then I could remember the numbers. Also, words that were difficult to spell. I was a really good speller because that's how I did it. I made a rhythm to the word. You give it a beat. This helps change the rhythm. It helps change your energetic situation. It sticks in your head. You don't have to remember your spell forever, but you do want it to kind of become a part of your brain wiring. The whole point of this spell is to change your situation, and that means changing your brain. Remember that the word spell comes from the root to tell and to speak. You are telling the universe and yourself how things are going to be. Words have power. And I want you to remember this even in conversation. Even when you're saying things like, oh, I can't. I wish I could. Those words have power. Don't use those words anymore. You shape the world. You shape your universe with your words. Some schools of thought, those with more ceremonial magic backgrounds, like Golden Dawn, stuff like that, use specific words with various vibrational frequencies to change the energy around themselves and their situation in an even more literal sense. You may see some grimoires that instruct you to vibrate a certain word or phrase rather than to just say it. So, example, I have the best job rather than I have the best job, vibrating it. Although in ceremonial magic, it's a little more structured than that. It's not just making stuff up. This is a specific instruction saying to vibrate it is to remind you while you're doing what you're doing. You should always say your spell out loud in a way that comes up from your belly. So, when I'm doing any kind of spell work, I'm trying to come up from my belly when I say it. I'm not necessarily trying to vibrate. I'm not a ceremonial magician, but bring it up. I know it's hard if you don't necessarily want people to know what you're doing, to find privacy to do things like this, but spells don't generally take too long. So, you can turn them. You can usually find 10 minutes somewhere. There are, of course, quieter magical modalities. You can do dream walking, astral protection, etc., astral projection, etc., to achieve your manifestation and magical goals. But that's not what we're talking about right now. But those modalities are generally silent. Nobody has any idea what you're doing. Remember that your spell, though, is a statement of how things are going to be. So it's not a request, it's a statement. You're going to state it out loud, you're stating it to the universe. If you're making a request, it's a prayer, assuming you're requesting it to someone who cares, like your God or your ancestor or whatever, whoever you've got. Spell work is not a religion. There are religions that incorporate spell work, like Wicca, for example. And of course, you can do both, and that's fine. You do everything you need to do to get it done. But a spell is not a request. It is telling the universe this is how it's going to be and changing the energy around the situation. So we've talked about the first two parts, the intention, the statement or incantation, the spell talking part. And lastly, we have the symbolic action. I don't want to confuse you by the order I'm telling you things, though. The intention always comes first because you need that to decide, to do the spell. But the statement or the symbolic action don't need to be in any particular order. They can be first, one can be first, one can be last. You can do them at the same time. I do like to restate the incantation at the end, just to kind of remind myself while I'm there before I sign off. And seal the deal, But again, that's just me. The symbolic action, though, back to what we're talking about, is just the thing you're doing with your body. There are tons of things people do. You might walk around a circle 3 times. You might make a specific hand gesture. You might create a piece of art or assemble a spell jar or a pouch full of symbolic items. You might sprinkle water on something or anoint something with oil, whatever. It's just the thing you do. That's what your symbolic action is. Generally, your symbolic action will involve symbolic items. Not always. Sometimes you're just using your body. But the action and the items are generally chosen based on the symbolism or the way the symbolism affects the energy of the situation. So if a paper heart symbolizes love for you, your symbolic action for a love spell could be cutting out a paper heart. If you have a particular perfume that makes you feel sexy, you could then anoint that heart with that perfume. There you go. You've got a symbolic action. You would say, I am incredibly sexy while you do that. I am very attractive. Maybe make up a little poem or a little chant, a little rhythm to go along with that, a rap even. My husband just plays music on the piano as his verbal component, I guess. All of these actions, though, the visual, the scent, they're helper tools to bring about the vibrational change you're looking for. A few weeks ago, I talked about visualization and how it's difficult for some people, especially in the beginning. But these symbolic tools that people use helps with that. It helps keep your mind focused on what you're doing. These symbolic things that symbolize, if you have a heart to symbolize love, then you don't maybe need to be terribly accurate in your visualization of what love looks like to you. You know what I mean? They are tools. Back in the day, people used to sneeringly call them crutches, and some people probably still do. But a spell is a spell, and a spell has words and symbolic actions. And some people go their whole lives using spells, and some people, graduate onto other methods of magic. And I personally do both. And spells can make you feel magical. And that is a very important part of having your magic work. If you buy a book or spells or look up spells online, you'll probably get a title followed by a list of ingredients and directions for how to manipulate these ingredients, and then something to say while you're assembling them or burning them or grinding them or whatever it is you're doing with them. And there you go. So you've got your title as your intent. Then you've got your words and your symbolic action. There's your spell. You are absolutely free to tweak this spell as you see fit. If it says to poke a candle with a needle and you don't have a needle, feel free to use whatever pokey thing you have. If you do have a needle, but you think that a thorn would be, more magical, if you are, then if you want to, or if you have a plant that has thorns that's symbolic to you of what you're doing, use a thorn. A shish kebab skewer, if that's what you've got, whatever. Thumbtack, honestly, it doesn't matter. As long as it makes sense to you and you have it, and you're not gonna say, well, I'm not gonna do this spell because I don't have all the right stuff, because that's ridiculous. That's how we end up never doing spells, basically. So don't do that. If the incantation sounds too hokey for you to take seriously or not flowery enough for you to feel properly magical while saying it, feel free to rewrite it as long as it still clearly states your intent. Sometimes I see incantations that don't clearly state the intent at all. In my mind, I mean, perhaps it felt symbolic to the person that wrote it, but to me, I'm like, this doesn't state the intent. In which case, I'm going to rewrite it so it does. But if symbolic words mean the intent to you, even if they don't mean it to me, then they're still good for you. If anything involved doesn't speak to you the way it spoke to the original writer, you are free to substitute something that feels more authentic to you. People are always coming to me asking me, what's the substitute for this and that? And I feel like I feel like you should know. If, if you're doing a spell to make someone go away and there's hot pepper in it, the purpose of that hot pepper is to make the situation hot and uncomfortable so they want to leave. So put something else in there. If you don't have hot pepper, put something else in there to make the situation hot or uncomfortable. Just figure out what it is. Whatever is caustic, hot, just something you wouldn't want to hang out and sit on, there you go. Pick something. We all have our own personal experiences that color how we see the world, and something that is available to you and symbolic to you may not be available and symbolic to me, and that's fine. And so I'm going to mix it up and use what's available to me. Most of us who do magic a lot have sort of ritual that we surround our spells with. You might set things up on your altar, candles, incense, whatever. You might cast a circle. You should ground and center. You may wish to do a cleansing ritual before or after. You might cleanse and charge your tools. You may pray for guidance before, do some divination after. Well, these are not part of the spell. If you do spells often, it is good to cultivate a ritual around them. These help you get into the right mindset. And professional spellcasters and people who do spell work as part of religious observances and public service usually have rituals around their spell work. Not only do they help you get into the mood beforehand, they help you recover after. Spellcasting for other people can be very challenging. You get other people's energy all over you. Spellcasting at other people, also very challenging because you make a connection. You have to make this connection with that other person to cast the spell. And you get all this gunk on you from them, from their situation. If they're sick, then you expose yourself to that energy. If they're hurting, you're exposing yourself to that situation. So it can be tricky to cast for other people. I mean, it's not deadly dangerous to do it once in a while, but, it can be tricky. It's obviously easier for people you know well, but, especially for strangers, it can really be problematic. That's why professional spellcasters charge so much. They're worth it. I don't cast professionally because it's a giant pain in the butt. Artina has way more patience than I ever will in that area. But after you cast for someone else, you want to cleanse all of that. And some people, want to do that every time they cast. I know there's a lot of people out there who are like, oh, you shouldn't do magic for yourself. But it is my advice, my very, very, very strong opinion that you should practice on yourself a lot before you start casting for other people. There is, you should be, first of all, you should be meeting your own needs before you go after trying to fix stuff for other people. And secondly, it's practice on yourself. You only have your own energy to worry about. You can, it's just safer to keep your, you can think of energy like germs. It's safer to kind of wallow in your own filth instead of like other people's. So yeah, absolutely cast spells on yourself. Cast spells for yourself. Do things for yourself. Practice before you start casting on other people, or for other people, on or for. There is a lot more to be said about spells. So we're going to call this part 1. Part 2 will come soon. If you see this on one of our socials, I absolutely encourage you to reply to this post with questions specific to the topic of spell casting, or head over to our Discord and ask on the podcast channel so I can incorporate your questions into part 2 and maybe even part 3. I will be, well, that's all for today. Thank you for listening. And of course, if you have any questions, additions, comments, concerns, or criticisms, please let me know, and I will be happy to address them. Happy New Year, everybody. Take care.